Hi, I'm Tom Zanton, and today I'm going to be talking to you about burned habitats, a place that I think humans were evolved to live. So, let's start off with what is a burned habitat. Burned habitat, very simply, is a place where there was a wildfire. A wildfire went through and it changed the landscape in a way. It created a burned habitat. So, let's start off with what are the advantages of burned habitats for humans. Burned habitats would have been relatively safe. Most animals are afraid of burned habitats. Humans, and for what it's worth, chimpanzees, are not. Even after the fire is gone, the burned habitat might have still been pretty safe because if there was less above ground vegetation, a lot of the large herbivores would have moved on because there was no food for them. And if the large herbivores move on, the carnivores would follow them. So in general, it would have been a pretty safe place because there wouldn't have been any food, wouldn't have been a lot of food above ground for the other large animals to be there. But there might have been a lot of food under the ground in the form of root vegetables, which I just talked about. I think root vegetables are the foods that our gut bacteria are made to eat. And on top of that, when the fire comes through, it can actually cook or partially cook the root vegetables, which would make them softer, easier to chew and digest. And in the case of starchy vegetables, it would actually make them more calorie dense, give them more digestible calories. On top of that, on the nutrition front, wildfires can actually increase the concentration of minerals in the soil. Minerals like potassium, iron, zinc, calcium, iodine, selenium, and magnesium. These are very important minerals that people often don't get enough of. But they would have been increased in the concentration of the soil in burned habitats. I think wildfires could even explain how our human ancestors could have acquired meat before they had the tools or the brain power to actually hunt for it. There's evidence that Homo habilis put cut marks on the bones of animals like antelope. But the question is, with Homo habilis' tools and their small size and their inability to run or throw things, how would they have hunted for antelope? Chimpanzees can't hunt for antelope. Homo habilis was, in a lot of ways, pretty similar to chimpanzees. So how did Homo habilis go out and get them? But if you say that a wildfire killed the antelope, either actually burning it or suffocating it, then it's pretty easy to say, oh, well, a Homo habilis could have just come in. They were looking for the burned habitat anyway. They could have come in and found a dead antelope and put some cut marks on it. It's a much simpler solution, I think, than to say, well, how did an animal that doesn't seem to be adapted to hunting kill an antelope? On top of that, burned habitats would have been pretty easy to, in a way, like construct. If there are birds called, I think, firehawks, and it's like a nickname for them, that can pick up burning sticks and drop them in places to try to flush out like mice and things that they can hunt. If a bird can figure this out, I think early human ancestors could have also figured out that, hey, you can pick up a stick that's burning and then you can spread the fire and make the burned habitat bigger. And I think that's probably what one of our ancestors, Homo erectus, was actually doing. I think Homo erectus was probably specifically adapted to living in burned habitats for a few different reasons. One, they grew taller, they lost their fur, and they were probably sweating quite a bit, and that would have helped them stay cool in the burned habitat. Now this is important because other animals are not adapted to stay in the middle of a burned habitat in the middle of the day. They get too hot. But humans probably wouldn't have this problem on most days. On top of that, I mentioned that they grew taller. Their larger bodies also would have helped protect them from the one type of predator that would be more dangerous in a burned habitat. In a burned habitat, you have less risk of being attacked by something like a snake because they like to hide in the undergrowth, and there wouldn't have been any undergrowth, or would have been less of it. You're less likely to get attacked by a lion or a leopard because they tend to be ambush predators. They like to hide kind of in the grass, and they try to avoid open areas when possible. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't have ever shown up, but it would have been less risk of predators like that. But there would have been a greater risk of predation from large birds of prey. And we know that that could have been a problem because there are a lot of our early human ancestors that were attacked and killed by birds. We have fossil evidence of it happening. So a burned habitat, they would have needed to adapt a defense against birds. And the best defense against birds is to get bigger, because they need to actually be able to fly and carry you off. So, which is more likely to get attacked by a bird, an elephant or a squirrel? And I think we all know the answer to that. On top of that, in burned habitats, there might have been less need or opportunity for sleeping in trees. So Homo erectus wouldn't have needed to have shoulders adapted for climbing. Then that could free up their shoulders to evolve toward being able to throw. And I don't think it makes sense to say that they were throwing for hunting, at least in the beginning, because chimpanzees can throw about 25 miles per hour, which is not nearly fast enough to be able to kill anything. So if you're throwing maybe even a little bit better than that, it doesn't like get you an animal and then like, oh well, I can evolve toward this thing. Like, you need to have a certain ability in throwing before you can start to evolve toward it. But even just throwing a teeny little bit better would help for defense against dangerous animals. So I think it makes more sense to say, oh well, once we don't need our arms for climbing, then we can adapt toward throwing. I think that makes sense in the context of a burned habitat. On top of that, Homo erectus grew larger brains, and at the same time their jaws and their guts got smaller, indicating that their diet was more calorie dense, and they spent less energy chewing and digesting, which is what we just mentioned should happen if they were eating root vegetables in burned habitats. It would have caused all of those changes. On top of that, humans can run long distances, which might not seem related at first, but if you're specifically adapted to burned habitats, then once you've exhausted one, you need to move on to the next one, right? And it might not necessarily be right next to it. So you might need to be able to travel a long distance, and if you're a vulnerable animal like Homo erectus might have been, then you need to be able to get there relatively quickly. But you might be thinking, well, how would they have even found the next burned habitat? Well, luckily, burned habitats send up signals, smoke signals, and you can see you can see the smoke from a long way away, or maybe even you smell it first. Humans happen to like the smell of wood smoke, a lot of them, and even if there's no smoke, there's kind of a cyclical nature to burned habitats. There's the initial wildfire, and there's the harvest after that, and then a little bit later there are the new shoots coming up, and then the next year, or somewhat later, you have a bigger crop of root vegetables, because these are plants that are specifically, at least in East Africa, these were plants that were specifically adapted to natural wildfires, basically a wildfire season. So they would, the wildfire would actually help them come back even better the next year. So even if you don't see any smoke or smell any smoke, if you know there was a burned habitat there last year, it might be worth it to go and run toward it, get there as fast as you can. I think it's pretty clear that humans are captivated by fire. We really like it, so I think that helps. I think that makes sense in the context of humans running toward fire, to say like, oh well, we like to watch it. I think that would help draw us in to go to the burned habitat. But there is one big monumental problem with burned habitats, and that has to do with when we left East Africa. or places close to there, places that were adapted to wildfires. So our tool use and control of fire allowed us to go pretty much everywhere on the earth. But we evolved in an area that has seasonal wildfires. And all of the other animals, and importantly, all of the plants in that area are adapted to regular wildfires as well. So if you start a fire in that area, the plants will kind of come back because that's what they're adapted to the wildfires. They come back from it. But if you leave that area and then you set a fire, those plants might not be adapted to regular wildfires, and they might not come back the way you had hoped they would. And if that ever happened, then early humans would have needed to resort to just whatever food was available. We had kind of backed ourselves into a corner with such large brains, we couldn't go back to eating grass or leaves or bark or fruits the way that a lot of other primates do. We would have needed something really calorie dense to fuel our big brains and our large bodies. So this is, I think, why people would have turned to things like meat and grains and cow's milk, things that I don't think were what they were originally adapted to eat. But they needed to do it in order to get enough calories and enough nutrients just to survive. And I think the fact that, I think if we went out and we're burning things down in order to create the safety of a burned habitat, then and if those plants didn't come back the way we had hoped, and we did start resorting to these other foods and different foods in different places, I think that helps to explain why nutrition is so confusing today, why it's so contentious, why we eat so many different types of food, and why we say we need to fit so many different types of food into our diet. Because we're out of our original context. We don't know completely what nutrients we need or how to get them when we're looking at it from like a farming perspective. But if we were to take humans back to this initial context, I think it would become really easy for everyone to get the nutrients they need. But out of that context, I think it might be impossible to optimize our nutrition, because the plants that we're eating just aren't adapted to the kind of environment that we're made to live in. And I think that mismatch is causing a huge problem for people. This is a theoretical idea for now, and I want to know what people think. So if you do have comments or you do have questions, please let me know. I love responding to comments. I'll be talking more about very specific parts of this coming up. So I want to thank you for watching, and please be sure to like and subscribe. That helps out. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.